my dear viewers, welcome to the video. This video is about William Wordsworth, and he is considered to be one of the greatest of romantic writers. So let's get started. Wordsworth was born at Cockermouth, Cumberland in 1770. And when he was very young, that is at the age of 13, he became an orphan. His mother died earlier and his father died when he was 13 years of age. Now his relatives, his uncles, they took care of him and his siblings, and they sent him to a school in Hawkshead. Now Hawkshead is a small place, it's a small town, and Wordsworth's association with this school is important because it is at this place that all his love for nature, all his belief in humanity, it was formed. So it was a small town, it was a small school that he went to. But after school, he would go outside, he would interact with nature, he would enjoy himself in the company of nature. So all that love for nature, that respect for nature, and that idea that nature can be your teacher, all these ideas were formed when he was at Hawkshead. Now after Hawkshead school, he went to Cambridge University and he graduated from there in 1791. Now 1791 he graduated, but before that in 1790 he went on a tour of France. Now this is again something important. It is an important piece of information so far as Wordsworth is concerned, because 1789 the French Revolution took place, the monarchy was ousted there, and there was this air of idealism all around. People believed in democracy, people believed that a new world order, a new social order was going to be established. So in this atmosphere of hope and idealism, he went to France in 1790, and then he again made a tour of France in 1791. So both of these tours are important because here Wordsworth, he got a first-hand experience of the enthusiasm that people had about the revolution, and how this revolution, the ideas of this revolution, they impacted him. So these two tours to France are important. Now around the year 1796, he had graduated in 1791, and he was poor and he did not know how to support himself, but a friend left him a legacy, and so he was comfortable now. By the time, by the year 1796, he was comfortable. So he and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, they became friends, and this friendship is extremely important from a literary perspective, from the perspective of literary history, because we all know that after 2 years, in 1798, both of them came out with this small but very influential book called The Lyrical Ballads. So this was the book which is said to have started the romantic revolution, the romantic movement in literature as such. So this is the book, and this friendship was very important. And later on, after some time, Wordsworth settled with Coleridge. Wordsworth started living with his sister Dorothy and Coleridge. I mean, Coleridge was a house guest with Wordsworth for a long time. Now, he married a woman called Mary Hutchinson in 1802, and then Wordsworth, his wife, and his sister Dorothy, they settled at Rydal Mount in Lake District. Now, this Lake District is also very important because Wordsworth has talked about this district, this area in England so much in his poetry that eventually Lake District and Wordsworth, they became synonymous, so to say. I mean, Lake District, whenever someone would mention Lake District, he would always think about Wordsworth. They became so synonymous. And again, there is this one more point which is to be remembered, that his sister Dorothy was always with him. She was his constant companion, and all the tours that he took later on, they were with Dorothy and Coleridge. Now He was made poet laureate in 1843. Now we have to remember that this book, Lyrical Ballads, it came out in 1798, and the book was popular, and the book has said to have started the Romantic movement. But as a poet, Wordsworth was not really very popular. He was writing profusely. He was writing many long poems, short poems, but still, as a writer, he was not very popular, and his popularity grew gradually. I mean, he did not see instant fame. His popularity grew gradually, and by when he was made poet laureate in 1843, I mean, that established his reputation as a serious poet. And then he died in 1850. So these are some biographical facts that we need to keep in mind while we are studying Wordsworth's poetry. Now, talking about his association with French Revolution, we can say that he began as an adherent of the revolution, but he ended as an extreme conservative. And why was that? Why it was so? Because when he made those tours, I talked about his two tours to France, 1790 and 1791. So during these two tours to France, the revolution was new, and the violence and the bloody aspect of the revolution, it was yet to take place. So he believed in the ideals of democracy, he believed in the dignity of mankind, and that is why he believed in this revolution and in the ideals of the revolution. But as time passed, and as this whole revolution, it became more and more bloody in the sense that more and more violent incidents were taking place, and more people were dying, and they were losing their life. There was a lot of bloodshed around. So he started losing his faith in these ideas, because it was difficult for him to understand how could a revolution which took place to empower people, why should it recourse to violence? So he started losing his faith in the ideals of the revolution, and gradually, ultimately, he towards the later part of his life, he became an extreme conservative. He became a person who believed in the glory of the past and who believed in the old order of things as they were. Now, as a poet, Wordsworth is said to be one of those poets who started a new movement in poetry. Now, this quotation is Wordsworth himself, and I have taken it from Henry Hudson's book, An Outline History of English Literature. And Wordsworth says here that the principal object then proposed in these poems, this quotation was there in his preface to Lyrical Ballad, the second edition. So he says the principal object then proposed in these poems was to choose incidents and situations from common life and to relate or describe them throughout in a selection of the language really used by men, and at the same time to throw over them a certain coloring of imagination whereby ordinary things should be presented to the mind in an unusual aspect. Now, there are three things which we need to keep in mind here, that for the themes of his poetry, he says that common life, common incidents, common situations, something which happens in the lives of common people, not in the lives of kings or queens or prince or princesses or in the lives of aristocratic people, but something which is related to the common life of humanity. It should be the subject matter of poetry. This was the first observation that he made, and he wrote his poetry around these themes only. And then he says that when we have chosen our subject matter, since we are talking about common people, so the language that the poetry will be written in, that language also should be the common, conversational, easy language. It should not be the pompous, artificial, rigid, stiff language, which was a norm in the neoclassical poetry earlier. So his theory of poetry, his idea of poetry, it was in direct opposition to the neoclassical practices of writing poetry. And then he says that while we are talking about common people and when we are talking about them in common language, we have to take care that we add something from our own imagination. Some coloring of imagination should be there, so that it is not very boring or monotonous. So for example, when we will do the Solitary Reaper, his poems, the Solitary Reaper, we will observe that there is this small incident about this very common sight, about this very common girl that we can find in any Highland area. But Wordsworth uses his imagination to add beauty and to add significance to this small incident. So he said that we have to use our imagination so that ordinary things would be presented in a beautiful manner, in an unusual manner. So this was Wordsworth's idea of writing poetry. And then there are these two very famous lines by Wordsworth that he wrote in the preface to Lyrical Ballads, that poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions. So he stresses the importance that poetry should be about your emotions. So poetry should be about recognizing and recording the spontaneity of your emotions. Or if you're not able to record your emotions just when you feel them, so what you can do, then he gave this phrase, emotions recollected in tranquility. So poetry is all about emotions which you recollect in tranquility. Maybe you felt something and then you carry that emotion within yourself, but you write about it after some time. For example, the poem Solitary Reaper, Wordsworth wrote this poem 2 years after he actually had watched that Solitary Reaper in that Highland area. So he had that emotion in his mind, that experience in his mind, and he wrote about it later on. So this was his idea of poetry, and these ideas were revolutionary at that time because they were in direct contrast to what was being written in the neoclassical era. Now, Wordsworth is recognized as the greatest poet of nature. And why do we say that? Because Wordsworth is one poet who not only talked about nature, but he had great knowledge of nature. So his love for nature was supreme. As I told you, while he was in Hawksheet, he would roam around as a boy, and he would roam around lonely, and he would enjoy the company of nature. So that love for nature was always there, but coupled with that love for nature, he had a great knowledge of nature. And the way he described all the natural phenomena, it was perfect. I mean, he would not taint them, he would not change them, he would describe nature as it was. But the most important point to be remembered is that for him, nature was a divine force. Nature was, Mother Nature for him. Nature was the greatest teacher of all for him. So he had that great love for nature, and that idea of nature being a teacher, nature being Mother Nature, and that idea of the need of nature in human being's life. All these things are reflected very clearly in his poetry. So we have had many nature poets, but so far as nature poetry is concerned, nobody surpasses Wordsworth. And secondly, he was the poet of man. When we say the poet of man, we mean that he believed in the basic goodness of humanity. He believed in the basic goodness of human beings as such, and he talked about human emotions, human dignity as it was. So he gave respect to humanity in all its aspects. That is why we call him that he was a poet of man and he was a poet of nature. And these are some of the major works written by William Wordsworth. An Evening Walk and Descriptive Sketches. These are two long poems which he wrote immediately after coming back from France. And Lyrical Ballads, I have talked about it. It has been the most famous book written by Wordsworth, and it wrote it in collaboration with Coleridge. And then poems in 2 volumes, The Excursion and The Prelude, which came out in 1850, the year that he died. And The Prelude is also a very important work by Wordsworth because it is autobiographical in nature. So Wordsworth has talked about the development of his idea, the development of his nature, of his personality, and his formative years. He has talked about all those things in The Prelude. So this is all about Wordsworth. And if you have any questions, any queries, you can talk to me or you can write to me in the comment box. So this is all for this video. Thank you.